him in Melbourne. Did you see him when he came to Melbourne?
What, in 1980-81?
Yeah.
No.
I saw him when he came. It was the only show where people just drifted in and out of the show really casually. And people just left and would come back, and it was the same. It felt like the same song was going over and over again.
Yeah. Well, that was Gary's gift.
Yeah. What's he doing now? He flies planes or something now? Do you know?
I saw. He toured Australia last year.
He what? Did he really?
Yeah, I saw him play at the Enmore Theatre.
Wow. Still looking pale?
He's doing well. Yes.
But you didn't feel any compulsion to write a copy of NME or anything, did you? Did you?
Well, I did go into a little bit of music journalism in my early days at university, but not at school.
Not at school.
No. Well, because the Gary Newman magazine would have been fairly limited, although he was putting out about 2 albums a year.
Right.
So, plus B-sides.
And what's your favourite song? Our Friends Electric, or what was the other one?
Cars.
Cars is the better one?
Yeah. They're both
so football was the sort of the sole obsession, really? Yeah. And just writing an autobiography, I think there's... do you need to make a decision when you decide to write an autobiography? Because I think it's a bit of a leap. It's a bit of a leap of faith. Everyone can write an article in the paper, a funny story, or an anthology of stuff. But actually, to put it together and give it a narrative and say, I'm actually going to put myself out there. Did you agonise over that at all?
I think I didn't know for quite a long time whether I was going to get a book out of it or not, and it did take me 6 or 7 or 8 years to write it, depending on your definition. So, and it's quite a short book. So I think perhaps my.
I've got the original manuscript. If anyone wants to read the long version.
So I think I certainly knew I had lots of stories, but it was hard to know whether I could make it into a proper narrative that made sense to me. And so it took a really long time for me to have any sense of what on earth I was doing with this writing, although I always had the kind of vanity to assume that I was an author, because I had to be. Because if it's not a book, it's like I'm not sure what a third of a book actually is.
Did any of your teachers at Ballarat? Where'd you go? Which was the Ballarat College? What was it called? St Pat's. St Pat's.
Yeah.
Did any of your English teachers or your English teachers at Xavier, did they know that you were writing these things?
No.
Right. Okay. So you never felt the need to get it assessed by anybody who knew about English or literature?
We had a pretty rigorous editing team.
Right. Okay. So that.
As it was, and I think because I had a big brother who was the quality control man, that was kind of all I needed, really, because he was effectively a grown up to me, and he was always 10 times more mature than I was. So,
and also, having written a book and going through the whole editorial process, can you explain to people what a dangling metaphor...
a dangling modifier.
What a dangling modifier is. Does anyone know what a dangling modifier is? Gregory, do you know what it is?
No comments.
Okay. Come on, Patrick, tell him.
I did have an involved discussion with my with the freelance editor who worked on the book and the in-house editor as well about a particular sentence and whether it contained a dangling modifier or not, and it relates to the relationship between subordinate clauses and main clauses.
Example?
An example.
Running around the corner.
Yeah. Running around the corner.
The building.
The wall loomed.
Yes.
So
you can't say the wall loomed if it doesn't relate to it. You can't use the participle if it's not included in the sentence.
Yeah. So the dangling modifier, the modifying clause in that sentence is running around the corner, and it doesn't actually relate to the wall looming because who's doing the running?
So how would you say
the wall's not doing the
without
running.
dangling? Running around the corner.
Yeah.
I saw
the wall loom. The wall loom. Yeah. yeah.
Bad sentence. You should use the dangling modifier.
Yeah.
Did you win or lose that argument?
I lost it pretty badly, actually. I did. I did change that sentence. So. It was an interesting process being editor because I work as an editor myself.
Well, it must be very difficult because you've got these stories are in your head. You know them back to front. You know how to tell them, and there is a way to tell stories. Yet you have to, there are some hoops that you've got to jump through in terms of actually putting out a book, don't you?
Yeah,
did you find that was that annoying? Was that okay? How did you find it?
Well, I guess because I edit books myself these days, I'm kind of used to the process of it. But inevitably, if you're an editor and a writer, you assume that you know everything about all possible fields in literature. So I came into the process with a pretty healthy ego, which was soon and quite rightly beaten out of me by the dangling modifier.
By the people who knew. Matt, are there any questions that people might want to ask Patrick?
Or Santo?
Gregor?
I'm DJ G'day from the Original Rules Footy Academy.
Welcome, DJ.
Thank you. I've been going through your book. I tend to take an interest in any sports books written in Australia, whether or not they're to do with Aussie rules or not. And I gathered from your book that when you were out in the Wimmera and the Mallee, the thing that struck me as tragic about your book was that, in actual fact, you don't have any English blood in your veins. It's all Irish blood. Yeah. And you've got a perfectly good game being played in the Wimmera and the Mallee, which has a hell of a lot to do with another perfectly good game played in Ireland, or Gaelic football. And you and your brother and your writing skills and your editing skills took it upon yourselves to completely ignore what was a perfectly good resource and recourse, all the heritage that was flowing through your veins. Now that strikes me as extremely perverse.
Great question.
Is that a question?
I would like you to comment on that and please explain it to me.
Yeah,
So
right.
I feel like it's a lot. What we've got here is a lost literary chance for both Gaelic and for Aussie rules. Because it's such a well-written book.
Thank you very much. I suppose... thank you, really. I suppose I was in denial about so much, so very, very much in my childhood. And nationality times two, because I guess I kind of focus on the fact, in the book I focused on the fact that it took me quite a long time to realise that I was Australian and to kind of take that on board. Despite the fact that I had an Australian accent, within probably about 6 weeks of arriving in Australia. But and the fact that my mum is Irish and my father's family is Irish and basically my entire family going back for centuries is Irish.
That's my point, son.
Yes, I realise that. It was always the Irishness was completely, effectively irrelevant to me because there was the Australianness to contend with. There was the Englishness because I was born in England and I'd lived my whole life in England before we migrated. And it's certainly my loss that I didn't take my Irishness on board more than I did. And I do acknowledge that in the book to a certain extent, my obliviousness to my Irishness. And, I think the day probably will come when, I do pay even more attention to it than I do on a day-to-day basis now. And the Kerry football team, God bless them, the kingdom, they do win the championship year after year after year. So, if I'd had any sense at all, really, that's the team I would have gotten on board with.